Hi there, and welcome to the Sheroes Collective podcast. This is Series 2, Women in Media. I am Renee Sparks. I'm based in Cape Town, South Africa, and I'm a public health professional with a foundation in nursing. Today's amazing Shero is none other than Lenina Rassool. Lenina is the producer and presenter of the Womxn Show, and she has more than 15 years experience as a journalist, with a focus on human rights and social justice. And those are my two favorite topics, so I'm excited about that. She's worked in mainstream media for magazines such as Femina and Cosmopolitan, as well as independent newspapers before she moved on into the nonprofit sector, working for organizations such as Activate Change, Drivers and OpenUp, which is also known as Code for South Africa. In 2017, Lenina joined Cape Town TV as the news editor of an anchor of Our City News, and then became the deputy director for the station in 2018. In 2019, she received funding from the Ford Foundation to produce and present the Womxn Show, which is a weekly television show that covers issues around gender-based violence and child protection. So on that note, I just want to add that it is October. This is when we are recording this, and the Womxn Show is 4 years old this year. So that is incredible. Lenina, I don't think you realize. I mean, a show for women, by women, and it's reached a milestone of 4 years. That is really, really incredible and a great inspiration for women thinking about doing something that's part of their dreams. And this really, really does add relevance and legitimacy to the work that we all want to do and aspire to do. So well done.
Oh, thank you, Renee, and thank you, and hi to everyone, and thank you for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited.
Yeah, thank you. Welcome. I'm going to jump right into it. I mean, we've had endless discussions, but I think the very first question I want to ask is, why journalism? What inspired you to take on this journey?
Oh, that's such a big question because I'm so old now. But journalism, I didn't actually want to be a journalist. So I studied journalism at, obviously I went through school and I matriculated, and then I applied to study journalism at Peninsula Technikon in Bellville, which is now CPUT. And the reason for that is that I make the joke, I was born with a pen in my hand. I was a reader and writer my whole life. All I wanted to do was write. I didn't know very much about the tertiary landscape, and which I think is a case for a lot of people in sort of certain cultures and communities where they just don't have knowledge about what there is. My sister had studied journalism, my older sister, and I thought, if I'm going to write, journalism is the way to go. Also, I thought, you can study writing, but it doesn't seem like a very secure career.
Oh, we know that conversation, right? That conversation. Yeah. Is it going to make you money? Are you going to be able to?
Yeah, it's not. It didn't seem to me to be a job, to be an author. So at least journalism was a job. And so I studied journalism. I've had a fantastic, I think, a very blessed journey since then. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew it wasn't sort of hardcore journalism at that point, but I went in not knowing what my options were, and I was fortunate to get a job shadowing gig, I think just for like a week or a few days in my last year at Femina Magazine. And they ended up hiring me, actually, because one of their writers had left. And so I started working for them before I graduated, actually. They made them lovely. They put me on a 4-month contract. And that was then made permanent when I did graduate. And then I spent a few years there, from there to Cosmo. And I like to tell the story. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Got the job shadow gig at Femina Magazine. Was reading like all of these amazing stories by women, because part of my shadowing was like to sort through old articles. And I remember I thought, this is what I want to do. And you can see the difference in my results because there's like the C student like throughout 2.5 years. And then I go back for the last 6 months, and all of a sudden there's this jump because now I knew what I wanted to do. And I thought it would take me at that point 10 years, because the pathway seemed to be everybody was saying it's really difficult to get into women's magazines.
Yeah.
And so I had this 10-year plan that I was going to work at community newspapers first, graduate to like mainstream papers, get, I don't know, almost 10 years experience. And then if I was lucky enough, I would be able to apply to magazines. I mean, I had this big jump.
Yeah.
Straight into magazines. Yeah. And so from there, did 6 years in magazines and then pivoted over into the nonprofit sector.
Yeah.
And that's where the rest of this grew
And
out
that
of.
was in communications, right? So moving into nonprofits now brought you into communications and advocacy, that space.
Yeah.
So it's really incredible how you know, when I started with this series, I didn't even realize myself just how broad this career pathway is. You know, I mean, I'd met a few people in comms and I didn't realize that they had a background in journalism. And when I started putting this together, I was like, oh my word, they actually do. Most of them do, not everyone, but most of them do. And it does make a difference in the way that they frame things and the way that they see things. So it's a bit like, I mean, I'm in health and I see nurses in management in certain spaces, and you see doctors in other, and it's the minute you see a different a person with a different background in the space, there's all of a sudden a broader view and a different lens, you know, some freshness that comes into the space. So that's really great. I want to touch on the fact that you've said you write. So you write and you publish opinion pieces, you've worked at magazines, and you've got the Womxn Show. How do you, and I mean, obviously, if you spoke about Femina Magazine, it was, I assume, all about women. But how do you actively then create spaces in all of these for women's voices to be amplified?
So, I mean, I think Femina, the self-explanatory magazines, Femina and Cosmopolitan. But obviously at that time, I don't think I was actively thinking about representation. Because obviously I was 21, 21 to 25, I think. So I was thinking about like work, and I was thinking about just being really thankful to be there and doing what I love, and that's what I love. But I do know, like in hindsight, when I think about it, you know, about 20 years ago, the landscape was very different in terms of representation. We had these women's magazines, but I think there's a lot of media now around sort of what type of things were in those magazines. I shared an ad the other day where they had a belly dance on a Sunlum ad that said, what's gonna, you know, what happens when you're too old to do this? Like that was literally an ad that I picked out. So in Jordan's ad saying, what you know, what if a woman's too old to belly dance? What is she going to do? So that was the sort of landscape that the magazines were existing in. And then I think just from a race perspective, which I didn't, you know, have a very, I think, conscious, again, it was about a job. It was about earning money. It was about doing what I love. The magazines were still very white. And it was very difficult. I as at that time, only person of color in the magazine at 21 years old, spent a lot of time trying to find at least one woman of color that needed to be featured in a lot of articles. And so now, when you're asking me that question, and it's 20 years later, and I'm 40 now, what's interesting for me is that we're still finding similar issues. It's still difficult to find women of color. I've noted this actually, especially over the past 9 years after I had my daughter. Because I am more cognizant of what she's watching and what the representation looks like to her as she grows. And it's quite concerning that it's still very similar across platforms, even though we've got social media now, even though we've got, like, you know, TikTok and all of YouTube and all of these things. So it's sort of a mission for me as one. Look, the Womxn Show, I produced the Womxn Show. It's a TV show. It was launched primarily to address systemic failures or issues within the gender-based violence system and make that more visible. But include a large part of that is also increasing the representation of women and women of color, showcasing the work that they do. A lot of the work in the GBV sector is done on the ground, on grassroots level, with women who are not very visible at all.
Yeah.
We'll still see interviews, right, with like the success stories are like huge, like directors of companies and organizations, bigger organizations, and sort of how they did it. We are really seeing sort of all women on many platforms, and so the show was one. The show was one, and we bring women on every week, and we speak about the issues, and we speak about the work that they do. I do want to write more. There's been, over the past 2 years, a deep desire to get back into writing on a more mainstream level, and writing about women also, and writing about the experiences. And I mean, sort of across the board. I mean, can I contribute, I don't know, essays to books, or interviews to mainstream media? Can I do a blog about women? You are doing Sheroes, so these kinds of things, And so the Womxn Show also exists. I mean, it's wonderful to see these things coming out, and the Womxn Show also exists to elevate this kind of work that's already being done. So a lot of the time we will go and we will air things that are already online, that are already on YouTube. But a large part of the population who don't have access to it, or don't have enough data to sort of watch videos online, they can also access it on TV and on the free-to-air, like lower bundles, because we're with Cape Town TV, and Cape Town TV is a free-to-air channel.
I think that's fantastic. That is really fantastic. I mean, I also engaged with you because of Quote This Woman Plus. I think what I'm seeing is that there is a movement. Women are trying to reach out to each other to create these networks, and actually to build on existing. So not necessarily create or reinvent the wheel, but actually, what are you doing in the space, and what is the next woman doing in the space, and how do we bring it together and actually make it bigger than it is? And I think that's what I'm seeing more of. So that's fantastic. So
Can I say one thing though, Renee? Can I say, I've had Kat from Quote This Woman on the show. We've done an episode. And one of the things, just speaking about representation and speaking to other women who are out there, and just last night late on Facebook, I had a conversation about someone who was saying, why is it so difficult for me to speak about success? And I went through a whole long diatribe around that, because Kath and I were just saying, I was saying to her, I spend a significant amount of time. We all want to increase representation. We all want to speak more about our work. But I spend a significant amount of time, actually, after 4 years, convincing women that they should come onto the show. Which is really interesting. And Kath was saying, I've never forgotten this, when she started Quote This Woman, she expected it to be, so Quote This Woman as a middleman between media and women, to get women into media. And she had expected it would be really easy to get the women and really difficult to get the media on board. But actually the opposite happened. The media were like, yes, we want more women. We want to be quoting them. We think this is wonderful. Bring them to us. And she had then struggled to get women to sign up, women to feel legitimate enough to be showcased in media, to be
seen as an expert. To be seen as an expert. I think that is our biggest problem, is how do I say I'm an expert in something? Because I remember Kath had mentioned this to us before. She had also visited our Tekano Fellowship, and she spoke to us there. That's when I registered with Quote This Woman, where she had said, if you have a job spec, a woman will look at it and go, oh, I'm only got like about 80% of what they're asking. I'm not going to apply. A man will go, I got like 10% of this. 10%, I can do this. They will automatically think that they can see themselves do it. They know they can do it, and they sell themselves like that. Where a woman will go, I can do X amount. We kind of weigh up and we go, no, we don't have enough. And yet
we don't have 100%, and that 100% is constantly shifting. And so I'm working on a sort of and even myself, I suffer from that as well, in terms of having to market the show that's sort of got my name attached to it. And I think if there's a broader message that we can send out, that I can use Sheroes, like we are all Sheroes, right? If we want to increase representation, it was a brainwave I had the other night. If we want to increase representation, we need to realize that we are representation. And I needed to realize that while I'm trying to hide away in a corner of the internet because I don't want to be seen to, be all out there and whatever. I think of my daughter. I think of all my friends' daughters, all the daughters I know. And I'm like, well, if I'm reading and inspired and motivated by the women of color and the books that they have now, that in Barbara Boswell or Audre Lorde or all of them, I'm taking from all of them. I would not. They had to exist. They had to put their name. They have to put their names on things for me to be able to see them and to know what's possible. And one day, I need to imagine that people are going to see me and say, "Oh, she can be." Whoopi Goldberg said. A lot of actors, black actresses, have said the first time they decided they realized they could be an actress was the first time they saw a person of color on screen. Yeah. And so, you can't be what you can't see. I mean, you can, there must always be a first, but genuinely, that's one of my favorite quotes. And so we are all representation ourselves. And so if we want to increase representation of women, we need to increase visibility of ourselves. Okay, that's my sermon.
No, really true. No, it's really, it's exactly that. And it's the struggle that we have because we've been cultured to be that person that's there for everyone, but not really seen. I mean, I can remember my parents also saying, don't stand out, just do your work, do what you were paid to do, and they will see that. And you don't have to even stir the pot to say, hey, I did this and I did that, which yes, at the time would have worked. But I think you're right. I mean, I look at my daughter as well, and it's like, why are we looking out there for the role model for them when we could very well be that role model? They are looking at us. So if you're going to stand back and if you're going to make yourself small, is that really what you want for your daughter? You want her to stand in her own on her own 2 feet and say, I am capable of doing X, Y, and Z, and not stand back for anything. So yeah, we've got our work cut out for us. We've got a lot of things to unlearn. Yeah. And on that note, I follow a lot of organizations when it comes to gender-based violence, one of them being Women for Change South Africa. And I find myself binge posting or reposting all of the posts they have around femicide or violence, which it can be extremely draining. And I'm just thinking about the topics that you touch on. I mean, it's quite triggering. How do you care for yourself? How do you make sure that Lenina's cup is full before she takes on the next conversation around gender-based violence or any of the other topics linked to it?
Yeah, no, that's a big question, I think. I will say when I did my first show, one of my guests came on, and I was thinking purely from at that point, journalistic perspective. I'm going to tell, I'm coming on to sort of do these stories. And this one of the guests said to me, how are you going to manage your mental health and dealing with this topic? And I was just like, what are you talking about mental health? Like, my job is to write stories, and I had no context for it whatsoever. But I have learned the hard way that it does take a toll, that there is a thing called vicarious trauma, where you can be traumatized through somebody else's story. Those are things I've had to manage. And then I will just say, because I've spoken about this also, I struggle in general sort of with mental health issues. I have periodic spirals of depression. And I don't know if the show or the work makes it better or worse. And I know there's a lot of talk about self-care and unplugging, but when you work in this space, you cannot actually unplug. I have to shoot a show every single week. So women who work in the sector are dealing with cases every single day. But I've learned a lot about mental health because part of covering gender-based violence, and there was a point where we not pivoted completely, or we sort of added mental health into it, because mental health issues are a direct result of gender-based violence, if you want to look at it. And then obviously you can't be exposed to those kind of things without being affected by it. Yeah. And so one, I've learned a lot of things. I've had to learn about what works for me when I'm spiraling, when I'm triggered, and one of those things is not completely shutting down, but getting to a space where I'm taking a bit of break, even from social media, even from the GBV groups, because we find ourselves in these groups. not just because you're in the sector. I think everybody is right now. Everybody's dealing with it. It's a countrywide problem. It's a global problem. So you can't help like being exposed to it and thinking about it and the stories. But I have to limit to a degree. So what I'll do is just like not go on at night. I'll start switching my phone up a little bit. I read a lot. So my go-to therapist is reading.
Yeah.
So I have a stack of books that I go to, and I just start reading that. I journal a lot. Those are sort of my two things. And then last year we did and then because a lot of people were tuning in, I think some of the feedback we got were tuning in for mental health stuff, and because mental health during COVID, it really elevated the narrative and the importance of mental health. So that was one sort of positive aspect that came up. People were talking about it. And I've been getting a lot of calls from people, for instance, about talking about mental health, antidepressants, referrals to practitioners, psychologists, etc., counselors of color.
Yeah.
So this topic of conversation was coming in background context. What type of psychologist or counselor, whatever, should we be speaking to? Does that matter? We did some shows around that, even on the Womxn Show.
Oh, wow.
So we applied for some funding to do a mental health show called Mental Health Matters, and we did 13 episodes of that last year. That was really helpful to me. Sometimes I used to say, if I'm struggling with a topic and I don't have any money, then I'll just like bring someone onto the show and get a free therapy session myself. But the Mental Health Matters, which is on the Cape Town TV playlist, all 13 episodes, was really good. We really, it was also about, our first episode is what happens in therapy.
Yeah.
Because what does happen in therapy, we just don't know. And what we know is like, what we see on TV is people laying on a couch and talking about it. I will say I do also go to therapy.
Okay.
Periodically, I don't do sort of a straight line. My therapist has said the last time I went to see is like, you can't only come to me when you're falling apart.
Very true. Very true.
You have to do some consistent work, right?
Definitely.
And so I do a lot of things, and then I try to, some of the stuff I've learned through doing those 13 episodes is doing the small things, making sure I shower, the big one. Trying to fit in, even like I look up 5-10 minute like Taibo blasts on YouTube, and I just try to get sort of my blood moving. That is the most difficult part for me. I go for walks. I try to insist on going for walks. So a lot of it is about a lot of the mental health is about actually getting the blood moving. So tiny things, and I've learned that I think one of the things people look for is what can I do to make myself feel better. But one of the, I think most profound things I did, and I need to find that book because I can't find it because I haven't been able to find it. But this woman actually did a checklist of like where you can be in your mental health, and she said that none of these things are going to get you like to the top, to number one, which is like absolute joy, happiness, whatever. But I started focusing on, if I take a shower, I'm going to feel like 3 to 5% better. If I go for that walk, it's going to build in another 3%. So I'm looking at it as like, a measurement for, and if the best that I can get to is like 50% for today, then that's great. And I think that is the main way that I manage mental health. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you for that honest and practical response. As you're speaking now about this last part, I'm remembering when I worked in the UK, we had a little card that they printed for us, and it was called the Spiral of Positivity. And what they would do was, if you came to work late because the buses just didn't show up, and obviously you frazzled, then they asked you, go into the staff room, take out your card and look at that. Where are you on the spiral? So it was like this tornado type of image on this. That was it on the card. And you had to visually then go, okay, I'm here. How do I get exactly what you're saying? How do I get to the next part? So whether you're doing breathing, whether you're going to go make that cup of coffee, whether you're just going to say, manager, I need 5 minutes to just find myself, compose myself, and then come out. And of course, you're right. I wouldn't be at the top of the spiral. I'd have to find some happy space there. So you just reminded me of that. I need to find that card. and maybe see how do we bring that back even in workspaces. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. Sometimes people give you an answer that sounds like a bubble bath and candles and whatever, but what you've just said is exactly, you need that short little thing or that practical thing, and it's very often that shower that you don't think is going to change things. My grandmother always used to say, when she feels bad, she goes to wash her hair. She used to tell us that all the time. Just go wash your hair, you will see the difference. And we used to laugh at her, but it was the truth. You somehow just felt a bit better. So yeah, thanks for that. And then lastly, what advice would you give to someone wanting to start a career in journalism or communications and advocacy?
I think that, obviously if it's a young person, they've got like all these options. There's a lot more options right now, right? So you can go and study journalism. We didn't have YouTube, we didn't have social media. So right now it's much easier. You're inspiring, right? You're just doing this podcast. You're getting the stuff together and you're doing the podcast. And so one of the things is just to be bold and to just legitimize yourself and get into that. To be willing to be seen is a theme that came up when I did my last interview, and this woman was speaking about just like doing something so that other people could know it's possible, and given all the issues around visibility, I thought, being seen and going forward and believing that I have something to say is a courageous act. And so those are the things. Let me just see if you want to get into comms or journalism. Comms and journalism is a very, now I think is a very like narrow space to put it in. You said earlier, you find a lot of people in comms have a journalism background. And I find a lot of people in journalism don't actually have a journalism background. So a lot of, we're not set anymore on like what we studied.
Yeah, true.
But the thing is just to be seen. I have a thread. There's a thread that wants to come through, and it keeps slipping away from me. Yeah, but like get there, start writing. I think it's just start. Yeah. Oh, I wanted to say, with the media landscape that we have now, with social media, with blogging, with all of these things, I believe that we are all publishers now. We think of these careers, or we think of these platforms as sort of institutional, but it's not really. It's like we are all, you can publish whatever you want, wherever you want. We've seen what's happened with misinformation, where people are publishing sort of the wrong things, or publishing without thinking, publishing without researching. And so for me, I'm fascinated by misinformation. So I'm like, if they can just be so bold about publishing the wrong stuff, we're so afraid of making a mistake and what we look like. I mean, we should be copying. We should be copying them to share the right information.
Yeah.
And so I think that's it. And then I think when I have a blog, but I really post about it, I just put like random stuff in there. But we should do the next thing is like, once you've written or created something, blast it so that people can find it, right?
And tag the right people and use the right hashtags. I'm learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, thank you so much, Lenina, for your time and also for sharing your wisdom. I did like that, the practicalities of what you spoke about. I think we focus on the big things all the time, but it's that, like you said, that first step, that just ideating, even talking to someone else and thinking, you know what, let me just try this. I mean, if I must tell you, that first video that I did on YouTube, my brother even came back to me and said, the internet is cruel. And it's all the same for what you've done. And here I am, I've ignored that comment and I'm here. So yeah, just keep at it and show up. We are the heroes that we are looking for, the sheroes that we were looking for in someone else. So yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of the Womxn Show. And I hope mental health matters will reappear at some point again. But to anyone listening, please go and look those up and have a look at the amazing work that Lenina is doing through those shows. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Could I just say, like, the Womxn Show broadcast at 6 p.m. on Sundays? Every Sunday at 6 p.m.
Okay.
On Cape Town TV and DSTV 263, and then our episodes are loaded onto the Cape Town TV
Fantastic.
YouTube channel.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Great.